Good afternoon, everyone. iTech India welcomes all the participants for today's NDLS session. Today's topic is metabolic syndrome and ART, and the speaker is Dr. S. Anuradha. Dr. S. Anuradha is the Director, Professor of Medicine at Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. She is also the Nodal Officer at ART Center and the Program Director of the COE in HIV at MAMC Delhi. She has done her master's in infectious diseases from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University of London. She is the recipient of the Fogarty Fellowship in HIV Medicine, UCLA. She is also the member of the Technical Resource Group, NACO. We welcome you, ma'am, for today's session. Ma'am, you are requested to kindly unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. What we shall be talking about today in the NDLS is a very, very important aspect of management of people living with HIV, and that is metabolic syndrome and ART. So what we will be doing in the coming hour or so will be, we first talk about what do you mean by metabolic complications in HIV and a brief definition of these. Then we shall talk about the genesis, the pathogenesis of these metabolic complications. We will talk about what are these metabolic complications, what are the different components of these metabolic complications, and then we shall talk a little bit about how metabolic syndrome fits into these metabolic complications. We will talk about the role of antiretroviral treatment in these metabolic complications. And then in the end, we shall see how and what are the implications of the metabolic complications on the care of people living with HIV and how they are very important for us in the management and overall management of these patients. As we all know that with over time, there has been universal access to antiretroviral treatment. And now with the adoption of the treat all strategy, HIV has now become what is a chronic manageable disease from a once life-threatening or very severe debilitating condition. ART has had a major role in improving the prognosis of people living with HIV, and it has caused a significant reduction in the HIV-related morbidity and mortality, especially that related to opportunistic infections, and has increased the longevity and survival of these patients. And we have found that patients are living for much longer than what was happening, say, about 20 years ago. But on the other side of that, that is with the improved survival, the person living with HIV's exposure to both the HIV infection as well as to the antiretroviral treatment has increased. So the duration of time that the person is on antiretroviral treatment has significantly increased. HIV infection per se is known to be responsible for multiple metabolic complications. And what has now happened is that antiretroviral treatment actually compounds this issue by adding to the metabolic disorders. And people living with HIV are increasingly being affected by these metabolic disorders, which adds to the complexity of the care of these patients who are already suffering from a really complex disorder, which requires a lot of care in their overall management. So let us briefly talk about what are the metabolic diseases and what is their genesis of these metabolic diseases in people living with HIV. If you look at this slide, it will show you a diagrammatic representation of what is the genesis of all the metabolic complications that are seen in these patients. We will start from the top left corner where we'll find that once HIV infection or the HIV virus enters into the body, one of the first effects that HIV actually does is it causes a depletion of the CD4 cells in the gut associated lymphoid tissue, which is called. In addition to the depletion of CD4 cells, there is also a disruption of the intestinal mucosal epithelium. These two things happen very early in HIV infection in a matter of days. So this depletion of GALT happens in a matter of few days and happens very early after the HIV infection sets in. These two events have major consequences in setting up the rest of the activation which happens. Because of the depletion of CD4 counts in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue and mucosal disruption, there are two events that get set into motion. One which is called dysbiosis. What do you mean by that? Normally, all our guts contain a certain kind of microbial flora. Because of this disruption of CD4 cells, what happens is there is a change in the intestinal flora from a more helpful kind of an organization to organisms which are far more pathogenic. So there is a change in the beneficial to harmful kind of microbial flora that inhabits the gut. Along with this, because of the mucosal disruption, there is what is called microbial translocation, meaning these organisms which secrete a variety of elements, these all these products of these microorganisms are then able to cross between these disrupted mucosal cells and enter into the bloodstream. So both the dysbiosis as well as the microbial translocation set up one of the most important components, which is immune activation and infection. So there is a persistent inflammation and immune activation which gets set up because of both these mechanisms. HIV itself also directly contributes to the immune activation and inflammatory reaction that it sets up. Co-infection with other viruses like hepatitis virus, CMV, EBV, and many others also contribute and compound this effect. And it is this immune activation and persistent inflammation that leads to the release of multiple pro-inflammatory molecules. And these pro-inflammatory molecules, as we can see, are like IL-6, TNF-alpha, CRP, D-dimers, the adhesion molecules, and these set up a persistent activated inflammatory response. Because of both this immune activation as well as persistent inflammation, what happens is the body actually becomes exhausted. The immune system gets exhausted and there is immune senescence, meaning from naive T cells, there is a shift towards the immunosenescent cells or the later or highly differentiated cells. So the body's response to other infections becomes much less and there is immune senescence. Both the inflammation, the immune activation, and the immune senescence are central to contributing to the multiple levels of organ damage that can be seen in these patients. HIV infection per se can also contribute to this organ damage, and as we can see, all organs can get damaged. There is lymphoid fibrosis, there can be, because of the action of the adhesion molecules, there can be cardiovascular diseases, there can be premature thymic atrophy, there can be neurocognitive impairment, and multiple other organ damage that can be set up in these patients. And this is one of the reasons, or this is one of the diagrams which will help explain why patients develop multiple organ damage and dysfunction in long-term HIV. We know that ART can inhibit or can stop viral replication to some extent, and so ART has a limited effect on HIV infection. However, once this cycle gets setting up, it is very difficult to control, and even ART will not reverse these complications. If you look at it further, HIV infection gives rise to immune activation and inflammation, and this is what is said to underlie multiple of what are called non-AIDS comorbidities or HIV-associated non-AIDS conditions, which means the shift has now happened or is happening from opportunistic infections to non-AIDS comorbidities, which are the non-opportunistic infections. They may include the ones that we know, like coronary arterial disease or cardiovascular diseases. There can be liver diseases. There can be non-AIDS defining cancers and malignancies. There can be renal damage, and there can be multiple neurological disorders. And central to the non-AIDS comorbidities is a syndrome of what is called metabolic syndrome, which we shall be talking about briefly. But it's also important to remember from here that though ART stops the replication of HIV virus, ART itself may contribute to the non-AIDS dividing comorbidities through its multiple side effects or toxic effects. And another thing to remember from this slide is that one should never forget the role of the traditional risk factors like lifestyle, age, other genetic factors, BMI, in contributing to the non-AIDS related comorbidities. So there is a combination of the HIV infection, which is the virus. There is the host with his or her traditional risk factors. And then there is ART, which is the added component in this. And all three of them together give rise to immune activation, chronic inflammation, and the multiple HIV associated non-AIDS condition, which affect almost all the systems of the body. One central key to this multiple HIV associated non-AIDS condition is this, which is lipoaccumulation or visceral fat accumulation. It is important to remember that this fat is not just happening in the peripheries. So it is a visceral fat, central obesity, which underlies a lot of this. And one of the greatest triggers for this lipoaccumulation is antiretroviral treatment. Of course, traditional risk factors also play a role in causing these, but the most important key here is ART. And so through multiple mechanisms, this lipoaccumulation can give rise to the classic pattern or the classic disorder of metabolic syndrome. So this is again telling you that there are multiple components to this, which includes the HIV infection, the dysbiosis, and the combination ART, giving rise to multiple other complications and then giving rise to cardiovascular disease. Then another important mechanism that underlies these metabolic complications, especially the cardiovascular complications, is insulin resistance. And that is one of the components also of the metabolic syndrome. So let us now look at what are the metabolic diseases in people living with HIV/AIDS. So the metabolic complications are multiple and they have been listed here. They include lactic acidosis, lipodystrophy, dyslipidemias, insulin resistance, cardiovascular diseases, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or NAFLD, bone mineralization disorders, frailty, senescence, and multiple other complications. The examples of these could include kidney diseases, HIV-associated neurocognitive disorders, and multiple other conditions, which can be said to be a part of the metabolic complications of HIV-infected patients and also compounded by antiretroviral treatment. And as you can see from this picture, the spectrum of HIV complications involve almost all systems of the body. They can involve the nervous system where they can give rise to cognitive defects. They can have multiple endocrine deficiencies involving thyroid disorders, diabetes. They can be producing hypogonadism. They can cause hyperlipidemia, lactic acidosis. They can cause pulmonary complications. They can cause cardiovascular complications, which are one of the most important causes of death now, once opportunistic diseases, infections have now become controlled. They can cause renal insufficiency, chronic kidney disease, and multiple skeletal and muscle complications. So the spectrum of HIV-associated non-AIDS complications is very widespread, and it can affect almost the entire body system, multiple systems of the body. So if you try to classify metabolic diseases in PL-HIV, you can say that some are probably more because of HIV infection itself, like NAFLD, metabolic syndrome, atherosclerosis, frailty, premature aging, and some of them are actually due to the compounded effects of antiretroviral related toxicities. And these include HIV-associated lipodystrophy syndrome, or what we earlier used to call lipodystrophy, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, hyperlactemia, and bone diseases. These distinction into because of HIV and compounded by ART is very blurred because both of them can contribute to it and one can worsen the other. But as a rule, and just to show you that some are caused directly by HIV and some are predominantly due to ART, it's just slide has just been put up there for you to understand that. So we looked at these were all the multiple metabolic complications of HIV. The main topic today, which was written, was metabolic syndrome. So now you must understand that metabolic syndrome is actually a very specific form of metabolic complication. And it is not a one particular thing, not one thing, but it is actually a combination of multiple metabolic dysfunctions. And central or key to the metabolic syndrome is the presence of central obesity, insulin resistance, which generally gets manifested as impaired glucose tolerance. So if you look at the definition of metabolic syndrome, the definition is based on having at least 3 out of these 5 components or criteria. And each of them are important for us to recognize so that we can screen our patients for presence or absence of metabolic syndrome. The most important, like I told you, was central obesity, elevated triglyceride levels, that is, increased levels of triglycerides in the blood, reduced HDL levels, elevated blood pressure, and an elevated fasting glucose concentration. So if any patient has 3 out of these 5, the person is classified or categorized to have metabolic syndrome. And there are multiple definitions of metabolic syndrome given by different societies and different organizations. Two of them are very important. One is what is called the ATP3 definition, or the Adult Treatment Panel 3. The other, usually commonly used definition, is given by the International Diabetes Federation, or the IDF definition. I am giving you the ATP3 classification here. And each component, like abdominal obesity, hypertriglyceridemia, low LDL, elevated blood pressure, and elevated fasting glucose, has a cutoff. This cutoff is different for men and women, especially for lipid values and the abdominal obesity, which is manifested or which is tested by waist circumference. So if any of your patients, or if our patients have any or 3 of these criteria that fit in, the patient gets diagnosed as having metabolic syndrome. So let us look at one of these large meta-analysis which was recently published, which tried to look at the prevalence of the metabolic syndrome in HIV infected patients worldwide. So this was a study on global meta-analysis. So if you look at this study and if you look at the results of this study, the study showed that the overall prevalence of metabolic syndrome in PLHIV, it was very variable. And it was variable because of the criteria used for the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. And over a period of time, the ATP3 criteria have also varied in their definitions of waist circumference, as well as blood pressure cutoffs and triglyceride cutoffs. So that is why since 2001 to 2014-15, there has been a variation in the diagnostic criteria for this. Also, depending upon which type of diagnostic criteria was used, whether it is ATP or IDF or some others, or the European criteria, you can see that the prevalence of metabolic syndrome in people living with HIV varies from anywhere between 16% to 31%. In most of these studies that were used, that were part of this meta-analysis, it was shown that the prevalence of metabolic syndrome in people living with HIV was higher than those not infected with HIV or with the general population. Remember, there are many studies across many countries, if you find, for the prevalence of metabolic syndrome in the general population, and it has been seen that people living with HIV have a higher prevalence of metabolic syndrome than those without HIV infection. And this is true even for those people who have not been started on ART, that is, who are ART naive. And some criteria, it was shown that the prevalence was significantly higher in women as compared to men. And most importantly, it was significantly shown that the overall prevalence of metabolic syndrome was much higher in patients who were on ART compared to those who were not on ART. And this significance was statistically significant. Also, the prevalence varied to a great extent by the age group of the people, the duration of the HIV, the severity of the infection, and the type of antiretroviral treatment that was used. But suffice it to say that metabolic complications like metabolic syndrome is a very, very important entity to be considered in people living with HIV that has significant implications on the um, overall picture and also management of these patients. So why are we talking about metabolic syndrome? Why we need to know about metabolic syndrome is that metabolic syndrome increases cardiovascular risk, means it increases any cardiovascular events the patient may have, like strokes, like MI, like angina, like sudden cardiac death. All these are cardiovascular risk. It also increases the prevalence or the likelihood of developing insulin resistance and further development of overt diabetes mellitus in these patients. Metabolic syndrome is a prothrombotic state, which again favors cardiovascular adverse outcomes as well as strokes. And metabolic syndrome also increases the pro-inflammatory state. So the importance of metabolic syndrome is that it is a very powerful predictor of future cardiovascular disease and type 2 DM. And ART and longer exposure to ART have been associated with more incidence of type 2 DM in these patients. That is why if we are able to recognize metabolic syndrome in people living with HIV and are able to control it to some extent, then we can actually stop the further development of progressive metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance into overt diabetes, which makes the cardiovascular implications much more graver. So it is very important to recognize metabolic syndrome at this point. So let us look at what is the contribution of antiretroviral treatment in metabolic syndrome. We know that HIV increases the risk of metabolic disorders even before introduction of ART, that is even pre-ART HIV infected patients have much higher incidence of metabolic syndrome, and ART initiation actually worsens the risk. Some studies report that the newer agents are actually better in causing or cause less insulin resistance compared to the older regimens, and that is true, and we shall see how. Most of the protease inhibitors are generally well known to cause the metabolic side effects, and some NNRTIs, especially stavudine, may cause long-term metabolic effects. There is not much evidence or consistent evidence on the use of NNRTI. We shall talk about this in subsequent slides. And older age, high BMI, and female gender are also factors which independently increase risk of metabolic syndrome. So if you look at the metabolic impact of antiretroviral treatment, and if you see these are the various ART regimens that have been tried in these patients, you will find that almost all of them in varying degrees cause a change or a rise in lipid concentrations, which means that all antiretroviral drugs have a propensity to cause dyslipidemia, but in varying degrees, and combinations may actually increase or decrease the effect of these. So if you look at the metabolic impact of ART going from left to right, we find that from NNRTI to NRTI to PI, the metabolic impact actually increases, meaning the PIs cause maximum metabolic derangements compared to NNRTIs. And if you go down the table also, from nevirapine to efavirenz, the metabolic impact of drug increases across the entire table. So what I would like to tell you here is that probably in this whole group, nevirapine has the least propensity, which is followed by your NRTIs, which are lamivudine, abacavir, and tenofovir. And if you go down the list of NRTIs, TDF, lamivudine, and abacavir have much less propensity as compared to D40. As many of us will remember, D40 was one of our first antiretroviral drugs used in our combination ART regimens, and we used to give that as our preferred first-line ART. And the problems with D40 was that over a period of time, we started recognizing more and more severe metabolic complications, and that is why D40 has been completely phased out of almost all programs across the world. The older PIs like indinavir were also having much higher propensity to cause metabolic complications and metabolic syndrome and metabolic impact. And it exists also for lopinavir and darunavir, but is less with atazanavir compared to the other ones. But remember, PIs as a group can give rise to much significant metabolic derangements among people living with HIV. So let us take one by one component of the metabolic syndrome or metabolic disorders that can happen in these patients and see how can we address these issues. So let us talk about ART and dyslipidemia. So as I told you earlier, specific antiretroviral classes influence lipid levels to different degrees, and PIs are generally associated with much increased propensity to cause dyslipidemia, and especially they can cause hypertriglyceridemia, that is rise in triglyceride levels. Also, they can increase the LDL levels in these patients. The lipid effects also vary across the drug class, PI class. Some have more propensity, some have less. Indinavir were had collections. Remember, ritonavir by itself increases triglycerides to a very large extent, but in the doses that it is normally used as a boosting agent, that effect gets mitigated to some extent. Among all PIs, atazanavir is relatively lipid neutral, but when you boost it with ritonavir, this lipid neutral effects gets mitigated because of the effect of ritonavir. Atazanavir, ritonavir, darunavir, ritonavir have better lipid profiles compared to lopinavir, ritonavir. And so this is what I want to show you, that these are the three PIs that we use currently in our program: atazanavir, ritonavir boosted, and lopinavir, ritonavir boosted, especially in our second line. And darunavir, ritonavir boosted darunavir is what we are using in our third line. And all of them have a tendency and have a propensity to cause dyslipidemia, especially hypertriglyceridemia, and also modest increases in LDL levels. If you look at the effects of the NRTIs, the NRTI effects also vary across the drug class. And like I showed you in your earlier table, tenofovir has the least propensity compared to stavudine, which has the highest level, which is no longer used. Lipid level effects of NNRTIs also varies very variable. Efavirenz is also associated with mild increases in total cholesterol and triglycerides, but among the newer NNRTIs, rilpivirine has been shown to have a less effect on lipid parameters as compared to efavirenz. So this study tried to evaluate how do we manage patients with ART-induced dyslipidemia. So if a patient develops dyslipidemia on ART, what can we do? So there are three options, and these four options were tested. The first is option A. If you can see this arm, is the option B. If you see option B is, this was a patient who was taking efavirenz, and this was a patient who was taking nevirapine. So nevirapine has less propensity, nevirapine caused less increase in triglycerides as compared to efavirenz. So you can either decrease, you can either switch the ART regimen to another regimen, like was done in arm C, or you can add another agent like pravastatin or a fibrate and then look. So either fibrate or pravastatin reduces it to some extent, but then you have to remember that there are significant drug-drug interactions between lipid-lowering agents and antiretroviral treatment that you have to keep in mind. So how do you treat ART-associated dyslipidemia? This is one of the biggest problems that we see in our ART clinics very often, that patients come to us with very high levels of lipids. And then what do we do? So what we can do is, often removing improves with removal of the offending agent. You can remove the agent if it is possible from your schedule, from your treatment, or you can add with the treatment with fibrates and or statins. Okay, think a lot of people have raised their hands. I don't know. Should we take the questions now, or maybe we can take later? Anybody? Should we take the questions now? Okay.
We can open the microphone at the end of the session for the questions.
Okay, we will take the microphone at the end of questions. All right, thank you. So then we will continue with the presentation. So it can improve either if you have the ability to change the regimen, then you should be able to remove that offending agent if it is possible. Sometimes it is not possible because we have fixed regimens that are given to our patients, and in some situations we are not able to change it. So in that situation, we can add an anti-lipidemic agent like a fibrate or a statin, which can be given to these patients. And like I said, we can talk about the drug-drug interactions. It is very important to remember that you have to balance the antiretroviral treatment very carefully with the lipid-lowering agents. Drugs like fibrates, like pravastatin and ezetimibe, have very low potential for interaction with antiretroviral drugs and can be used relatively safely. Some drugs like lovastatin and simvastatin, which were used very commonly by us as lipid-lowering agents, are contraindicated to be used with protease inhibitors. Atorvastatins, rosuvastatin, and a combination of statin and fibrates that sometimes is available in the markets one has to be very cautious when we use it with HIV infected patients who are receiving protease inhibitors. But the thing is that pravastatin is not yet available freely in our country, so it is a problem giving these patients pravastatin. So one can give atorvastatin to these patients with close monitoring of both liver functions as well as creatinine phosphokinase, which can show a rise. So one has to look for the toxicity of these drugs very, very carefully. So if you look at the newer class of agents, which is raltegravir and dolutegravir, which are our integrase inhibitors, they can be usually very safely co-prescribed with most of these statins. All right. Darunavir also cannot be given with our older statin, and even there are significant interactions with atorvastatin with darunavir. So if it's available, so you can try pitavastatin, but again, availability becomes a little problematic. So one has to be careful in selecting the statin that has to be given with these patients who have very high levels of lipids. So let us talk about the next thing, which is insulin resistance. So what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is actually defined as a condition where the body has higher levels of insulin, which are required to exert the normal biological response, meaning that to bring down the blood sugars to normal level, the body will require a higher dose of insulin to be secreted. And so this hyperinsulinemia gives rise to a lot of problems. And the insulin resistance can give rise to multiple complications. In fact, is said to underlie most of the complications related to cardiovascular disease. And it is also known that in many patients, insulin resistance over time becomes overt diabetes mellitus. So like I said, insulin resistance, again, the lipid metabolism or lipid dyslipidemia contributes to insulin resistance, as well as HIV infection itself. There can be other oxidative stress and other factors like HCV infection, which can also give rise to insulin resistance. ART can also contribute to insulin resistance, and insulin resistance also further compounds metabolic syndrome and increases the cardiovascular risk in these patients. So there can be direct effects of the ART on insulin resistance, like usually because of protease inhibitors and also to some extent by NNRTIs. And there can also be indirect mechanisms by causing a change in body fat. So when there is much more visceral adiposity or visceral lipid deposition, the insulin resistance actually increases. So either directly or indirectly, both insulin resistance can be caused by multiple antiretroviral drugs. So this is just a study which was presented long back, but it just tries to show you that over a period of time with increasing age, among HIV and non-HIV persons, what is the incidence of diabetes mellitus? And as you can see, that the incidence of diabetes mellitus keeps on is much higher in the HIV infected compared to the non-infected across all age groups. So if you don't control insulin resistance and it goes continuously unchecked, it can contribute and it can manifest as overt diabetes mellitus in the long run. And so the other thing, and one of the major landmark studies which was there, was the incidence of myocardial infarction according to the duration of exposure to antiretroviral therapy. And this was a DAD study, which was a landmark study in this regard. And it showed that over a period of time, with increasing exposure to antiretroviral treatment, the incidence of cardiovascular events much goes on increasing. So that use of ART per additional year increased the risk of relative risk of MI to 1.26, and it was one of the very important risk factors for development of myocardial infarctions in patients with ART. Of course, male sex, smoking, prior history of CAD, and age were the other kind of traditional risk factors, but ART was right up there as one of the important risk factors for patients with HIV, which is manifested as a risk for causing MI in these patients. So if you look at the coronary heart disease or CHD in these patients, of course, HIV infection and ART have now been added to this cardiovascular risk, but one must never forget the other risk factors like age, gender, family history, physical inactivity, abdominal obesity, cigarette smoking, hypertension, diabetes, and lipids. This graph will also help you show that some of these factors like age, gender, family history, they are not modifiable, but all the ones in this yellow or this amber colored thing, are all modifiable risk factors. So one must always stress on removing these modifiable risk factors in these patients. So how do you treat insulin resistance? Well, if you can avoid the implicated PI for this condition, you should try. But in many situations, for example, once our patients move ahead, nowadays a lot of them are on protease inhibitors, and our third line will always contain a protease inhibitor. That cannot be avoided in some situations. So that inherent risk of the regimen will always exist. So if we can substitute a PI with an NNRTI, if the regimen potency can be maintained, we should try it. But in, like I said, many situations that is not possible. If that is there, then we should treat our patients with diabetes once they become diabetic, and the treatment is similar to that for the HIV uninfected persons. There are conflicting issues and reports regarding screening and treating for insulin resistance. So, do we screen for insulin resistance? Do we get a plasma insulin level done in all our patients? Or if somehow we are able to document insulin resistance, do we treat it? Well, there is no conclusive recommendation on this, especially for PLHIV. But it is important to note that since central adiposity or visceral adiposity is one of the key components of insulin resistance, one must try and control that and all the other traditional risk factors if we want to bring down insulin resistance. So another important metabolic complication that is seen in these patients is mitochondrial toxicity. Why does ART cause mitochondrial toxicity? It is important to very briefly go through this. We all know that in the cell, glucose gets converted to pyruvate, which enters into the mitochondria for acetyl-CoA, enters the Krebs cycle and produces ATP. And oxidative phosphorylation requires the presence of a very important enzyme called DNA polymerase gamma, which is the mitochondrial DNA. So what happens is whenever NRTIs are used, NRTIs cause mitochondrial toxicity by inhibiting this DNA polymerase gamma. By inhibiting the DNA polymerase gamma, there is no further mitochondrial DNA. Oxidative phosphorylation decreases. This entire cycle within the mitochondria of pyruvate getting converted to acetyl-CoA and going into the Krebs cycle does not happen. So what happens is both the pyruvate and the free fatty acids don't get converted to acetyl-CoA. Instead, the pyruvate gets converted into lactate, and that is the physiology, or that is the genesis of hyperlactemia or lactic acidosis that is seen in these patients. And mitochondrial abnormalities or mitochondrial toxicity also underlies one of the very important components seen in patients who are receiving antiretroviral treatment, which is called lipodystrophy. Now it is coined as HIV-associated lipodystrophy syndrome. It is a combination of lipoatrophy, which means peripheral fat wasting, and lipohypertrophy, which is a central fat accumulation. So there is peripheral fat wasting, which is associated more commonly with the NRTIs, especially the thymidine analogs. Stavudine has the maximum propensity to cause it, and the others have less propensity to cause it. It is also there when combined with efavirenz-based regimens. Lipohypertrophy, central fat accumulation, or visceral fat accumulation, more commonly seen with PIs, efavirenz. And the important thing to be noted, it is just not about accumulation or losing fat. It is associated with dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, lactic acidosis, all of which have the same complications on metabolic syndrome. So some of us who have seen all these kinds of patients in our ART centers, these were some of our patients who were on older regimens, like stavudine based regimen. So if you can see, there is a significant loss of buccal pad of fat. All these patients, if you can see, there is loss of peripheral fat. Also, there is accumulation of other kind of fat. And if you can see, there is this classic buffalo hump, which is seen in these patients. You can see this is abdominal collection, or you can see this visceral fat within the body. So both fat loss, which is there, peripheral fat, lipoatrophy, and lipohypertrophy are components of the lipodystrophy syndrome. So this central adiposity is not that it's just there, that person just becomes fat. That's not what is, it has significant connotations in that. It is associated with multiple dyslipidemia. Also, this accumulation of fat, especially visceral fat, is what is supposed to contribute to the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in these patients. Okay, and that is important contribution of liver-related morbidity in these patients. There are multiple other effects which can happen. Like I said, NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. In fact, after alcoholic liver disease, NAFLD is now the most important cause of chronic liver disease in patients with HIV and even in the world, even without HIV. It is higher in HIV infected patients compared to general population. Insulin resistance is responsible for the liver injury. It results in steatosis or fat deposition. Then there is NASH or steatohepatitis, which is followed by fibrosis. There is liver cirrhosis, and in many situations, there can also be primary hepatocellular carcinoma in these patients. Frailty or aging is another component which is associated with increased, which is increased in patients who have this increased immune activation, inflammatory response, and metabolic components are said to underlie the component of frailty. Frailty means the person becomes aged far earlier than what a general population would age. So age and senescence are much interrelated, and there are other multiple complications which can happen, especially neurodegenerative diseases like HIV-associated neurocognitive dysfunction or HAND. There can be frailty, sarcopenia, bone diseases, osteonecrosis. There can be cardiovascular diseases. There can be cancers, HIV-associated non-AIDS defining cancers, which are not related to the HIV infection per se. So they can happen in all these patients, and chronic inflammation underlies some of these very, very important mechanisms. Last part of my topic is going to be, what about the newer antiretroviral drugs? We have talked a lot that the older drugs had significant impairment of metabolism. What about the newer drugs? And we will talk a lot about dolutegravir, because most of our regimens are now changing towards DTG based regimens or dolutegravir. So one of the very important long-term side effects of patients who are on integrase inhibitors, especially DTG, is progressive rise in weight and clinical obesity in patients who are on DTG-based regimen. And so I'm going to talk to you briefly about two studies, the ADVANCE study and the NAMSAL trial, which are trying to show us what is the effect of DTG-based regimen in PL-HIV. So if you look at the main drivers of weight gain, DTG or bictegravir, PIs are some of the important components which increase weight in these patients, and we shall see how it is happening. So the NAMSAL study actually tried to assess the change in body weight and BMI in 3 different arms of patients, and the patients were followed for, 2 different arms, and the patients were followed for 48 weeks. So this was an arm in where patients were given, 293 patients were given TDF, 3TC along with DTG. The other group received 3DF TTC along with efavirenz, but here the efavirenz dose was 400. We used 600, here it was 400, and they tried to look at what was the difference in the body weight and BMI in these 2 groups of patients. As you can see, there was a significant increase in weight and BMI, which was very statistically different in both these groups, in that patients who were on DTG gained much more weight and had a much greater increase in BMI. Also, the percentage of patients who actually developed treatment emergent obesity, defined as a BMI of more than equal to 30, was much, much higher in patients receiving DTG. The other study which we are going to talk about is the ADVANCE study. In the ADVANCE study, 1,000 odd patients were randomized into 3 arms. One was TDF, FTC, efavirenz. The second arm was TDF, FTC, dolutegravir. The third arm, instead of TDF, was TAF, FTC, dolutegravir. And as you can see, there were almost same number of patients in all the 3 groups, and the follow-up was there for 96 weeks. So if you see what happened in ADVANCE study by body weight and BMI in each of these arms, as you can see, those patients who received TAF, FTC, and DTG had the highest increase in body weight, not only at week 48, but also at week 96, compared to the TDF, FTC, efavirenz arm. Also, the percentage of patients who develop obesity And treatment, so overweight and obesity was highly significantly increased in patients who received tenofovir, alafenamide, FTC, and dolutegravir versus those who received tenofovir, disoprovir, furoxide like TDF and DTG compared to those who were on TDF, FTC, and efavirenz. I think I'm going to, the time is almost over, but I think I have just have a couple of slides left. So it is important to note that there was also a change in lipids seen in these patients. So it is important to remember that DTG causes significant weight and clinical obesity in both men and women, and it increases the trunk and limb fat. And it is very important to note that this does not plateau at 96 weeks, it keeps on increasing. So what is going to be the long-term effect of this weight gain and central adiposity on DTG-based regimens? We don't know yet, so longer follow-up studies are required. It is important to note that the gain in weight which is seen with DTG is made worse when you combine DTG with TAF as compared to FTC, as compared to TDF, and that is another thing that has been noted in most of these studies. So, to summarize, metabolic syndrome or metabolic complications have very important dyslipidemia, insulin resistance as underlying mechanisms. There can be so many manifestations related to the liver, NAFLD, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, liver disease, multiple cardiovascular events, strokes, cardiac failure, atherosclerosis, sudden cardiac death, diabetes mellitus, which has its own set of complications and it worsens the cardiovascular events. So all these metabolic diseases or metabolic complications in people living with HIV are very, very important to recognize and treat. So how do you treat them? Exercise, nutrition, medical nutrition therapy. For patients with insulin resistance, you can give metformin or thiazolidinediones. If patients have become diabetic overtly, you treat diabetes. We manage the dyslipidemia with anti-lipid agents, and you manage hypertension in these patients. The implications are long-term metabolic derangements are associated with these patients, are HIV-associated non-AIDS diseases, since now we are able to win over most of the opportunistic infections. These are contributing to much morbidity in these patients, and it is adding to the complexity of care of these patients. It is very tricky because to select the best suited ART regimen for patients is very difficult. When you treat these conditions, multiple drug-drug interactions are there, which one must be aware of and one must actively look for while modifying treatment regimens. But it's very important to remember that one must never ever forget the traditional risk factors in these patients. Never forget cigarette smoking, alcohol, body weight, lack of exercise. Some of these are very, very important contributors along with patients, along with metabolic syndrome, which can give rise to much of the complications in these patients. That was my last slide. If there are any questions, I'd be very happy to take that.
Ma'am, there are some questions from the chat box.
Yes, I am just trying to find out where the chat box is gone.
No, I have the questions
Okay.
with me, ma'am.
All
Yeah,
right.
is it necessary to do baseline lipid profile and other diabetic parameters before starting ART?
It is especially important if you are going to put your patient on a PI-based regimen. It's very, very important if you're going to start a protease-based protease inhibitor-based regimen. And also now it is better to start and do these tests at baseline in all patients. So yes, baseline lipids, baseline sugar is very important. Your patient could already be a diabetic and you might not know about it. So it is very important to do that. Yes.
Yeah, ma'am. Next question. If there is a pre-existing metabolic syndrome, does
Yes.
it get aggravated by NNRTI?
Yes, it is known that many a pre-existing metabolic syndrome, metabolic complexions are getting worse by all ARB drugs, some more, some less. So like I said, the propensity to cause metabolic complications is very variable. Some cause it more, some cause it less. So it can happen. Yes, that is true.
Yeah, I'm not very sure about the next question. Many centers are working without medical officer. Can a cutoff of TG, HDL, LDL, etc. same way fasting sugar so that counselors, staff nurse can be framed and shared with all centers so that patient can timely refer to physician for opinion?
Absolutely. In fact, there was a technical resource group TRG meeting yesterday where we discussed these NCDs or non-communicable diseases, and NACO is going ahead to evolve a strategy for diagnosis, recognition, and the further plan of management of non-communicable diseases. And it is going to come out soon. It will be, the NACO has planned this, and NACO will come out with some definitive document or something for all our ART centers, definitely.
Is there any study on the effects of a meat-rich diet versus vegetable-rich diet in the incidence of metabolic syndrome in patients on ART?
I cannot tell you offhand whether there are such studies existing, but I'm sure there are multiple studies that have been done on diet here, on across many aspects of metabolic syndrome. Offhand, I am not very sure whether it exists, but I can definitely look and I can get back to you if I'm able to find something.
Thank you, ma'am. This was the last question from the chat box. Any more questions? Participants are requested to please write in the chat box.
So there are no questions. No more questions.
No, ma'am.
I can see that there is one message. Okay, so thank you, madam.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for this. Yeah.
No more questions, is it?
I don't think so, ma'am.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, we'll get back in case we have more questions on our email.
All right.
Right. Thank you, ma'am, for this informative session.
Thank
you to all the participants for patient listening. We can end the session now. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.